This is CXO Secrets, the podcast that takes you inside the minds of business and technology leaders and reveals the strategies behind their success. Coming up in today's show.
When you think about starting a company, and I'm one of the few CIOs that became a CEO of a high growth company. You know, many CIOs talk about being the CEO of IT, and many of them, I believe, are kind of wantrepreneurs versus entrepreneurs because they don't want to take that pay cut and risk and cushy life to go off and take the leap. And we did. But what matters when you start a company is what budget dollars are you targeting? What stories must you tell to take those dollars? And then what are the aha moments in your trial and product experience to win hearts and minds to get you through procurement? And I learned this from my dad. Keep your mouth shut, listen, and learn, and earn the right to be on the team. I learned that from my dad, and it was reinforced when I first joined JSOC. You earn the right to be on the team every single day. What you did yesterday won't keep you here tomorrow. And you have to be a learn-it-all. That's how you're going to execute. That's how you're going to grow. That's how you're going to be a better leader.
CXO Secrets is powered by EDS, going beyond connections. Find out about upcoming C-level events, experiences, and insights at edsxevents.com. Snehal Antani, CEO at Horizon 3 AI. Thank you for joining us on CXO Secrets.
Thank you, David. Pleasure to be here.
And tell me, where are you joining us from? And it's Friday as we record today. What's your work week look like so far?
Yeah, so it's Friday here in the Bay Area. It's been an amazing week. We're kind of at the end of conference season. And so yesterday I was in LA doing a keynote at a CXO conference talking about cyber resilience. And then this weekend there are a bunch of CEO events in Vegas for the F1 race. So I'll get to fly out and enjoy that for the first time. And we have actually many F1 racing teams are customers of ours. And so I've got to be very careful which area I duck into to make sure I don't offend other customers.
Yeah, there's more and more technology around F1 than there ever has been before. And yes, lots of eyes on Las Vegas this weekend. I hope it's a good race. Fast forwarding, rewinding maybe, depending upon your perception of time, to today. What I want to talk about today is, includes leadership when under attack. I want to talk to you about developing high-performing teams for high-pressure environments like F1 and, cybersecurity, frankly, and also about how we can think about applying those principles to cyber risk management in an AI age. Hopefully that all makes sense. First of all, though, tell me about your company. Tell me about Horizon 3 AI and what your work, you've already given us a bit of an insight, but in a typical kind of week or so, what your work there looks like.
Yeah, so my background, I was a CIO at GE Capital and then moved out to the Bay Area to be the CTO at Splunk. And at the end of 2017, I decided to leave industry altogether to serve within U.S. Special Operations for about 4 years. And it was the hardest, most meaningful work of my career. And I just grew so much as a leader in that period. But that's where I met my co-founder, Tony, and my early team at Horizon 3. And when they retired from the Air Force and the military services, and I finished my time at JSOC, we started Horizon 3. And we invented or pioneered this concept of AI hackers. And the whole idea was that as a CIO, I had no idea I was secure until the bad guys showed up. Am I fixing the right vulnerabilities? Am I logging the right data in Splunk? Does my team know how to respond to a breach? And the answer is, I don't know. And I can't wait for a hack to find out. I can't pay a consultant to show up once a year to test a small slice of my environment. For every patch Tuesday, I wanted a pen test Wednesday. Every time my environment changed, I wanted to be able to test to verify that I wasn't exploitable. And there just wasn't a way to do this. And so we leveraged the use of AI as a force multiplier and as a way to provide speed, scale, penetration testing of your enterprise networks.
Right. So that's what Horizon 3 AI does now. It is automated penetration testing because the way that we would do it manually, it just isn't up to it anymore, whether that's monthly, if you're lucky, yearly, more likely. That just isn't good enough to really protect your environment as regards to how the cyber threats are evolving and how rapidly the cyber bad guys are knocking at your door.
Yeah, I mean, we don't brush one tooth once a year. We brush all our teeth
No.
at least once a day, if not twice a day. And an annual pen test is brushing one tooth once a year. That's what it is. And that just isn't going to work in a world where the attackers are only getting faster and are only getting more effective with the Iron Man suit that is AI, enabling them along the way.
Oh, I love the Iron Man suit vision there. All right. So I tell you what, we'll come back a bit more in a bit more detail about why you do, how you started, why you do what you do, and what that means for organizations and those in organizations responsible for cyber risk there. But I want to roll back the clock a little bit just to understand your journey to Horizon 3 AI. And you spoke about it there, but going even further back, looking back at your LinkedIn, I see we have a certain big blue 3-letter company and some former colleagues and connections in common back in the e-business era. Remember the e-business era, the early 2000s? And it was IBM WebSphere that was very much on vogue. And you were very much in the middle of that, weren't you?
Yeah, I had this amazing opportunity when I graduated from undergrad to move to Poughkeepsie, New York, which was where the mainframe was pioneered. And at the time, the dot-com crash had just happened. Silicon Valley jobs weren't as plentiful as they once were. And this was right before the era of Google and Facebook and so on. So you really had Microsoft, IBM, and Oracle as the three major employers. And I was so lucky to go to IBM Poughkeepsie because, you know, the difference between those that say cloud and those that say mainframe is the year they were born. And so I had this opportunity as a software engineer on the IBM WebSphere mainframe product line initially to learn so much about enterprise computing, enterprise software, enterprise customer behavior. I then grew up and moved into distributed systems writ large, including mainframe and x86 kind of distributed architectures and disaster recovery continuous availability architectures. I know there was some overlap there with your experience. And what I really love looking back are these parallel lessons. So if you think about mainframe customers, they trained like they fought. They would intentionally fail over from one data center to another every month or every quarter to build that muscle memory for recovery. They would go off and make sure that their parallel sysplex was configured correctly. They would go off and test each LPAR, each reason, each failure mode to make sure that they were continuously available. And the most cyber resilient companies do the same thing today. They train like they fight. They build that muscle memory for incident response. They proactively understand the weak spots in order to get after how to recover very quickly. And so I think that great DR companies tend to also be very resilient to cyber attacks. But companies that didn't take disaster recovery seriously, that didn't build that muscle memory, are often what I think are ostriches in the era of cyber, which is sticking their head in the sand, hoping nothing bad happens because they don't care to build that muscle memory for resilience.
I haven't heard LPAR for, it must be 20 or so years now. And, you know, you mentioned your experience from mainframe going into distributed systems towards mid-range and so on. And I think mid-range learnt so much from mainframe. I was mainly P-series, AIX, all of that sort of stuff. And I was in the systems management discipline working at IBM around about the same time that you were. And then as listeners to the show will know, 9/11 happened, and that was a big change for a lot of companies that by 2000, 2001 had becoming more and more digitized, but they realized that we need to take disaster recovery so more seriously than they already had been. So that was a pivot in my career towards helping organizations build resilience, build disaster recovery, ensure that they could mitigate any kind of threats. And as we discussed before the cameras rolled, a lot of the software, a lot of the hardware, a lot of the processes that we applied then to physical damage, to data centers becoming unavailable for whatever reason, actually still apply now when we're talking about ransomware recovery. It seems as though there's a lot of the same bits of hardware, same bits of software, same recovery point, recovery time objective that we still talk about now, albeit with a different threat that we're responding to. And you're absolutely right. And I boil it down to failing to plan is planning to fail. And if you are not testing your resilience, if you're not building up, to use your phrase there, that muscle memory, then how can you expect it to go right when the worst does happen? And it will. And it will. This is the assume breach mentality. Something bad will happen. It's just a matter of when.
Yeah. And in fact, when a server crashes, and I saw this when I was a CIO at GE Capital, when a server crashes in those first few moments, you don't know if it's because of an IT admin issue or a cyber attack. Yet you have two distinct processes for triage. The IT team is trying to figure out if it's something that an admin made a change to, or a DNS record changed, or something to that effect, or an external third-party service went down, or a breach of some sort. So one of the first things that we did was we brought together those workflows and those triage processes. So if a server crashes, it's both. It's Schrodinger's cat. It's both an IT crash and a hack until we know one way or the other. And then you move into more specialized workflows around cyber recovery versus IT recovery. But those workflows still significantly overlapped. The way that you're going to recover your data, the way you're going to test to make sure that your data is in fact recoverable. I remember at GE Capital, right when I joined, there was a huge outage. And the outage was, I think, in our VM or vCenter environment. And everyone's like, oh, don't worry, we've got backups. But then actually it turned out that there was some connectivity between the primary and the backup workflow where all the backups were also affected from that particular outage. And we had no backups. And so they didn't know that because they weren't training like they thought. They weren't building that muscle memory for recovery. They weren't exercising their processes. In DR, you know this better than anyone else, it's not a technology problem initially. It's a process problem. It's a culture problem, and it's a mindset problem. Technology, honestly, is the easy part of that process.
A backup isn't a backup until you have restored from it. Amen. Let's fast forward there a bit there. And you mentioned GE earlier on. You mentioned it just then as well. And, given that this is the CXO Secrets podcast, you've had quite a lot of CXO roles, including being, and correct me if I'm wrong here, the first CTO at Special Operations, Joint Special Operations Command. I'm sure there's a lot that you can't talk about there, but I'm curious as to what the most important things that you have taken away from your 3.5 years or so as CTO at JTOC that have informed what it is that you do now.
Yeah, it's amazing if you think about each of the CXO positions I took. First at GE Capital as a CIO, I was a functional CIO in enterprise architecture, and then a business unit CIO, and then a divisional CIO there. And then I was the CTO at Splunk and helped do quite a bit in R&D and scale the go-to-market side. And then my time at JSOC was pretty amazing. Remember, my military background is watching Jack Ryan and Tropic Thunder. I didn't come from a world of service. My parents didn't serve. My grandparents didn't serve. But you had mentioned 9/11 earlier. After 9/11, many of us, or most people, I think, had this burning desire to want to do something of consequence and do something of meaning. And in 2001, 2002, there was no clear or obvious path for me as an undergrad in computer science to affect the fight in some meaningful force multiplier type way. And then in the rise of ISIS in the 2014, 15, 16 time, that desire to want to do something again started to reignite. And at that point, I was fortunate to have made more money than I needed, but not enough to fly around in private jets and be a pretentious, typical Silicon Valley dude in skinny jeans. But I was able to take a break from industry and take that 99% pay cut and go serve. And I got to work alongside some of the best leaders the world will never know about. And I got to sit alongside and understand grit and focus and mental resilience and planning and preparation, operating rhythm and cadence, all of these things that make JSOC the best functioning organization in the world. If you read about Team of Teams from Stanley McChrystal and so on, you'll get just a glimmer of, or a glimpse of what happens within that type of organization. So what I would say is I grew more personally and professionally taking the time to serve than I did in any other experience in my career. And I hope other CXOs take that risk, that financial risk, that career risk, and actually go off and work on a problem they care deeply about. One, to affect a problem that matters, but two, you will grow in ways that make you a far superior leader for that next role.
So, with the lessons that you learned from Time, Big Blue, IBM, GE, JSOC, as you say, then you then co-founded Horizon 3 AI. At the time, and let's acknowledge that that was a little while ago. At the time, what was the insight? What was it that you were trying to fix? Because I think the cyber challenge certainly has evolved. And obviously, we're talking now a lot more about AI than we were even 3 or 4 years ago. So what's been your journey with Horizon 3?
So back to the original problem where for every patch Tuesday, I wanted a pen test Wednesday. I was at DoD, or now Department of War, and we wanted to look at our environment, our networks, through the eyes of the attacker. Because in cybersecurity, the only perspective that matters is the attacker's perspective. And so the only way to get the attacker's perspective is to run a penetration test. And so we had this outside group come in and run a pen test, but they could only scope a very small slice of my network. And I said, well, what about the rest of it? Well, you better pick a good sample set. I'm like, well, that doesn't really help. Your network is a snowflake. Everything's going to be different. There's no real concept of a sample set. And so they went off and did their thing and gave us a bunch of findings and said, cool, we're going to crash and fix these right away. Can you come back in a couple of weeks and run a retest? I'm like, no, we'll come back in 18 months. Like, what am I supposed to do in between then? Hope for the best. And so it just reminded me that even in world-class organizations where cyber leads to life or death and kinetic warfare, you were still brushing one tooth once a year. And so I said, there's got to be a better way. And when I looked around state of the art, there was breach and attack simulation products and categories. And we tried them and they just didn't work. You couldn't test your whole network. They weren't safe for production. And so I said, all right, this is the company we're going to go start. At the time, I also had exposure into the offensive cyber mission set. So I got to really understand how offensive operations work in the military and national level. And so I said, this is a graph analytics problem. I think there's a technical way to do it. My co-founder, Tony, and I worked through some prototyping, and we saw an art of the possible path. And so the idea was there. But when you start a company, honestly, the idea doesn't matter. What matters is the early team you're able to form. And so I was able to put together my co-founder and I, this amazing early team of former military offensive cyber experts, defensive cyber experts, and nerds in skinny jeans from Silicon Valley that know how to build, ship, and sell world-class enterprise software. So we put those pieces together, found the right team, and we went off to building. And I'll end with, when you think about starting a company, and I'm one of the few CIOs that became a CEO of a high growth company. Many CIOs talk about being the CEO of IT, and many of them, I believe, are kind of wantrepreneurs versus entrepreneurs because they don't want to take that pay cut and risk and cushy life to go off and take the leap. And we did. But what matters when you start a company is what budget dollars are you targeting? What stories must you tell to take those dollars? And then what are the aha moments in your trial and product experience to win hearts and minds to get you through procurement? And so in pen testing, the budget dollars were compliance dollars allocated to mediocre consultants, which is awesome. I can use SaaS, AI-enabled SaaS, to get rid of mediocre labor. Perfect budget to get after. And then it was about what stories must I tell and what aha moments must I deliver to get there.
Valuable lesson for anyone going on that entrepreneurial journey there. Coming back to offensive security and talent, mediocre or otherwise, there's a challenge, isn't there? We talk a lot about the cyber skills challenge here, and particularly when you're looking at offensive security experts, ethical hackers, there aren't as many around as you might like to think, and there certainly are not enough around to service the need that as an industry is needed. Certainly, even doing the pen test manually once, twice a year, whatever it is, and certainly not at the frequency that you talk about doing it there at Horizon 3.
Yeah, I mean, so when I was doing research on Horizon 3 and whether to, if this is the path to go down, it was a very basic supply and demand analysis, actually. There are only about 25,000 certified ethical hackers globally. globally,
Globally.
25,000.
Wow.
And the way to validate that is OSCP is kind of the primary entry level credential into penetration testing and ethical hacking. Go to LinkedIn Sales Navigator, search OSCP as the criteria, and then look at how many there are. And you're going to find of the 25,000 or so now, there are only about 5,000 in the entire United States. There are less than 1,000 in the UK. There are only, I think, 60 or 80 in Finland. Now, in Europe, it's especially interesting because a Spanish ethical hacker is unlikely to service a German company. Usually, you're even more constrained because you're constrained to the language and culture pool of those folks. And so in these markets, you have not just shortages, but extreme shortages. And of those 25,000 people, most of them are in the military. They're not even available to commercial entities. And on top of that, it takes about 10 years of hands-on experience after you get the OSCP to be considered a senior penetration tester. And that's just op tempo. That's just time. That's just experience. So in the supply-demand equation, there was an extreme shortage of certified ethical hackers with experience. Yet the demand for these skills had skyrocketed due to NIS2, DORA, CMMC here in the United States, GDPR, PCI, and other compliance requirements. Plus, cyber insurance companies are now demanding organizations build proactive security and cyber resilience programs where you're testing yourself more often. So in the world of just basic economics, severely constrained supply with huge spike in demand is why Horizon 3 this past week on Tuesday was announced as the third fastest growing company in North America for the Deloitte Fast 500 award. And it was all comes down to just basic economics of supply and demand of certified ethical hackers.
And then in terms of understanding the demand for what it is that you do, the next question I want to ask is AI, obviously, and about how AI has been, but really how you see it will continue to change the game, not just from a defensive point of view, but also from an offensive point of view, because AI is that double-edged sword, and you need to know how sharp both sides are and be able to wield them in the right way.
Yeah. So the topic of AI in cyber, I think, cuts across three sub discussions. The first one is talent. What effect is AI going to have on cyber talent? And the next one is, in what ways are AI enabling and accelerating the bad guys? And then what must the good guys focus on in leveraging AI as that good guy Iron Man suit? So for the bad guys, there were two really interesting articles that came out in September. The first was the first Anthropic threat research article where a single ransomware operator was able to defeat or jailbreak Anthropic and Claude Code's controls in order to build a bunch of agents on Claude to act like a ransomware team. And the way that they did this was basically extreme compartmentalization. If you think about the old spy movies, the need to know. Well, if you have a prompt that is asking Claude to do something malicious, Claude's safety mechanisms are going to get triggered and say, nope, not allowed to do this, kill the session. But if you break that up into 5 or 6 very precise prompts that individually look benign, but in aggregate look malicious, Claude can't figure that out. And so what this attacker did was extremely compartmentalize all of these malicious tasks into individual agents that looked perfectly safe. And this hacker, it's legendary what he did. Not only was he able to get Claude to execute malicious commands in ransomware 17 companies, he had one of the agents look for and pilfer and steal data from those companies. He had another agent estimate the price or what that data would be worth to a ransom.
Oh, wow.
So Claude actually priced the ransom. Then he had another agent send out the email with the price that was determined. And so this entire thing should have been executed by one large ransomware team, was executed by one operator and a bunch of agents. And so what that shows us is force multiplier. A single bad actor can now operate like a much larger team. And this is actually basically impossible for any of the frontier models to stop, because if they lower their is this a bad actor threshold, they're going to start to trigger false positives and anger their good users. And so what are the bad guys going to do? They're just going to keep subdividing tasks until they stay below that threshold for malicious detection.
And, you've mentioned force multiplier there a few times as we start thinking about how cyber criminals are working. Yes, you've been able to do it once by creating a number of agents that go under the radar, if you like, of Claude or whoever. And then you stick them all together and you start to call that something as a service, and you start to scale that beyond. And then that one way in which you as a bad guy has been able to make a bad thing happen, you're able then to sell that on to many other people. And that also becomes that force multiplier, certainly as far as attacks with organizations are concerned. And so I guess from a cyber defense point of view, let's put ourselves, as we start to wrap up, put ourselves into the minds of the CIOs, the CISOs, the CTOs working with the companies with whom you work. How should they be? I mean, people are worried, right? But you mentioned ostriches and fighters there as well. How should people now be looking, not just right now, but also over the next 12, 18, 24 months to best protect their organizations in the face of the threats that you've just described here, AI-powered and otherwise? What would your recommendation be for them to be asking the right questions and to be putting the right strategies in place right now?
Yeah, so let's start with and I gave this keynote at Black Hat with the NSA, and I brought up this fact. Our AI hacker, Node Zero, successfully compromised an organization in 77 seconds. 77 seconds. Wow. Point, click, shoot, go. No humans involved, no prior knowledge, execute. And this is a legit organization with legit tools in the security stack. So if your defensive team can't detect and stop me in 76 seconds, it's game over. Because at second 77, we're going to get full domain compromise, lock every user out of their workstation, lock them out of the building, and run havoc across all of your data and critical systems and crown jewels. And there is nothing you can do about it. In fact, a couple of years ago, we had a 9-year-old kid hack a bank in 4 minutes and 12 seconds with our product to prove that AI also lowers the barrier of entry and skill set required, because all this kid had to do was point, click, shoot, and go. So what does that mean for defenders, for CIOs, back to my previous roles that I held? First and foremost, the future of cyber warfare is AI fighting AI with humans by exception. And so as defenders, we need to improve our detection time, our detection of dwell time, or reduce attacker dwell time. There are things we've got to do just to get faster, and that's about effectiveness. And I said earlier, the only perspective that matters is the attacker's perspective. The attacker's perspective is how you're going to prioritize your vulnerabilities. The attacker's perspective is how you know that your EDR is actually working together. Your attacker's perspective is how you can prove to leadership that you're getting better over time. Your defensive activities don't matter. What matters is what can the attacker do to you right now. This is why proactive security, cyber resilience, and exposure management are becoming incredibly important initiatives for those CXOs. And I'll end with two things here. The first is, part of that is technology, right? And we are the best in the world at that attacker's perspective. But more importantly for the CXO, it's cadence. How do they build the heartbeat? Just like we did for disaster recovery. We're going to intentionally fail over our data center every single month, so we understand how to do recovery in that other cold region, or in that warm region that we've got. You wanted to build that muscle memory for disaster recovery. You've got to do the same thing. You've got to run a pen test every week. Every Monday morning, you're going to walk through those results with your team and the team leads of every major component, your network engineer, your IT admins, your EDR team, and so on. And you're going to walk through and say, what did you see? What did you miss? And what tickets must you open to get better? And you're going to be tracking the burn down of those tickets. And you as the CXO have to set the pace of that. And the final bit is why the CXO matters now and why they should care about this now versus 10 years ago. In 3 words, duty to know. 10 years ago, if you didn't know about a vulnerability and you got hacked, you could plausibly deny liability and say, nope, I didn't know. Cyber insurance companies are now denying claims for your attestation of cybersecurity not accurately matching your actual posture. SEC and other regulatory bodies are now holding CXOs accountable, saying, I don't care if you knew about the vulnerability or not. You should have known. You were not doing your job. You have a duty to know obligation. And so I think that duty to know cadence the attacker's perspective, and the fact that attackers are no longer extorting you, but they're actually going after and destroying your business. Look at Jaguar Land Rover as an example.
Yep.
Elevating the game to a point where the CXOs are either going to be active defenders or ostriches, and I don't think the ostriches are going to last very long in this climate.
Yeah, no more time for ostriches, like you say, and that duty to know thing. You're absolutely right. More and more, the responsibility, the buck stops when it comes to cyber risk management. Absolutely, with the CIO, CISO, whoever. Thank you for sharing those insights about your journey, your experience, and how you've brought them to bear with what you're doing now with Horizon 3. We are almost out of time, but before we go, there are some questions that we ask all of our guests, and these really lean into you as a leader, I think, Snehal, and how you've brought those lessons to your leadership style now. And the show's called CXO Secrets. So my first question is, what is your secret? If you were to put any of your modesty to one side for a moment, tell us what key attribute you believe has enabled you to achieve what you have today.
I think there's two. The first is, and I learned this from my dad, keep your mouth shut, listen, and learn, and earn the right to be on the team. I learned that from my dad, and it was reinforced when I first joined JSOC. You earn the right to be on the team every single day. What you did yesterday won't keep you here tomorrow. And you have to be a learn-it-all. That's how you're going to execute. That's how you're going to grow. That's how you're going to be a better leader. The second part is, as you become a leader, render yourself obsolete. You should be comfortable enough with your skills and comfortable enough with your ego to hire in people better than you in key functions and continue to bring in more experienced specialists to take and drive that function. So as a CEO, I had to do everything at one point. I was the CFO, the CMO, the CRO, the head of HR, taking out the trash, doing whatever I could to get the company going. I take pride in hiring a world-class chief revenue officer, so I don't have to deal with it anymore. I take pride in hiring a world-class chief people officer, so I don't have to do that job anymore. And so as a leader, you've got to be, and there are a lot of CIOs and CXOs that aren't like this. It's all about them. It's the two thumbs pointing at themselves saying how awesome they are. And it's all about their ego, their pride. And I think earn the right to be on the team and be the learn-it-all underpins the confidence to render yourself obsolete at every chance you can.
We do a Pass the Question where guests on the show have the opportunity to put a question to a future guest, whoever they may be. And Snehal, we have a question for you from previous guest Ryan Preece, who is Deputy CTO at the King's Trust here in the UK. And he asks this question.
If you are sat in your CXO position and you're looking to build your leadership team, what are the main attributes you look for in creating effective leaders and an effective leadership team?
One of the really important parts of a high-performing team is back to very binary. You're either a learn-it-all or you're a smart jerk. And I have no tolerance for smart jerks. What I have tolerance for is learn-it-alls. The other part is not just the individual member of the team, but how that member is going to fit into the culture of the team. At my executive leadership team, we can finish each other's sentences. We have complete context and understanding of what everyone's doing. And I don't believe in functional OKRs. I don't believe that the marketing team is doing well if we're missing our sales number, or that the product team is doing well because we shipped code on time, but we're not hitting our expansion number. For me, it's one set of metrics that bind the team together, that force us to be mission aligned and mission focused. And so the number one thing I look for is a person looking out for themselves, not for the effectiveness of the team. And so culture fit into the executive team is the single most important thing I look for.
Finally, what question would you like me to put to a future guest on a future episode of the show?
There's a very challenging debate happening in industry on product leaders versus spreadsheet leaders. and take SpaceX versus Boeing. SpaceX, political stuff aside, SpaceX with a product leader in Elon, and Boeing, which had a spreadsheet CEO, and I forgot what the person's name is. And you look at the impact and effectiveness of those organizations and how the product leader in the product-led company almost always out-executes the spreadsheet-led company. So my question to the next CXO is, how important is it for you to be technically savvy, technically deep, and knowledgeable of your core technology and product versus being a general manager spreadsheet type executive?
Really good question. We've spoken on the show around that in the past, but I'm really looking forward to asking that question to a future guest. Thank you very much. It's been great to speak with you today, Snehal. And if people want to follow your insights, learn more about what it is that you do, where should they best go?
So I'm very active on LinkedIn. I also answer messages on LinkedIn. So find me on LinkedIn. It's Snehal Antani, but just Google Horizon 3 CEO. You can copy paste my name and track me down. That's the best way to do it. And I'm super excited to engage in conversations on social.
It's been great to engage in conversation with you today. Snehal Antani, thank you for joining us here on CXO Secrets.
Thank you.